Good morning, everyone. I'd like to get this hearing started. Welcome to the hearing of the Budget Subcommittee on Education Finance. Today we will be hearing a number of the Governor's budget proposals on a variety of subjects, including K through 14 mandates, Proposition 39 energy efficiency programs, independent study, charter school oversight, deferred maintenance for state special schools, and school facilities. We are still waiting for some of our panelists, and so why don't we jump to issue number 3, the Governor's budget proposal on independent study and blended learning. I would like to invite up to the witness table, Lori Carney, Department of Finance, Ken Kappen, Legislative Analyst's Office, and Monique Ramos from Department of Education. Welcome, everyone. Why don't we start with Department of Finance? Oh, yes, you're on.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you. Lori Carney with the Department of Finance. I'm pleased to present the Governor's 1415 proposals related to independent study and blended learning. As your agenda points out, schools currently have the option to offer non-classroom-based instruction through independent study programs. However, this option is administratively burdensome as it's currently constructed. So expanding on the funding and operational flexibility provided to local educational agencies through the local control funding formula, the Governor's budget proposes to increase instructional flexibility by making a few adjustments to the existing independent study program requirements and creating 2 new options for independent study. Regarding the existing independent study program, currently the student-teacher ratio in IS programs must not exceed the ratio for all other educational programs operated by the district, county, or charter school in order to receive ADA funding. We propose that this requirement be applied to grade spans and that the ratio be may be collectively bargained to an alternative ratio consistent with LCFF provisions. This would apply to the new course-based independent study and blended learning options as well. Our proposal for the existing independent study program also specifies that each student work product need not be signed and dated in order to qualify for ADA funding. ADA would still be determined by the time value of the assignments, but each assignment would not need to be signed by the teacher. This reduces schools' administrative burden, including appealing audit findings in cases where the student work is complete and deserving of funding, but is denied. The Governor's budget also proposes 2 new independent study options: a course-based independent study program that would better meet the needs of students in grades 9 through 12, especially those enrolled in online courses, and a course-based blended learning program that would better meet the needs of students in classes utilizing online and career readiness instruction in a classroom setting. The 2 new options share many of the same requirements. The time value for apportionment purposes is course-based instead of assignment-based. The course can be up to 1 year in length and may be combined with other instructional options to meet minimum instructional minute requirements and to compute average daily attendance. Courses must be of the same rigor and educational quality as equivalent classroom-based courses. Adequate minimum teacher and student interaction must be provided, including at least 1 meeting per week to ensure the student is working toward satisfactory educational progress. As with the existing IS program, the student-teacher ratio must not exceed the ratio for all other educational programs operated by the district, county, or charter school. We propose, again, that this requirement be applied by grade span and that the ratio may be collectively bargained to an alternative ratio. The differences in the 2 new programs include the course-based independent study option would be limited to students in grades 9 through 12. We think that this age group is best equipped to handle the more flexible course-based program, which requires a student to be more independent and self-motivated. The blended learning option would be an option for students in any grade who are at a physical school site each day. A blended learning course must be taught under the general supervision of a certificated teacher. A paraeducator working in coordination with this teacher could have line of sight responsibilities within the classroom while students work online or receive career readiness instruction. Given that the courses under our proposed new options are required to be of the same rigor and educational quality as equivalent classroom-based courses, we propose that charter schools be able to count these courses as classroom-based instruction for purposes of funding determination for charter schools. We also note that department staff have brought some technical concerns to our attention, and we are working with them to resolve those for the May revision. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Next, we'd like to turn to the Legislative Analyst's Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Kenneth Capon with the Analyst's Office. As the administration just indicated, this is a proposal with a couple different moving pieces. Earlier this year, we released a report that covers all of these proposals in greater detail. For today, I'll just be speaking from a handout that covers the highlights of the governor's proposal. On balance, we believe the governor is moving in the right direction here. We think he has identified some reasonable solutions to long-standing issues with independent study, and we think with some refinements by the legislature, this proposal could be made even stronger. First, though, just maybe some background would be helpful on what are we even talking about and why are we talking about it. So turning to page 1 of our handout, we have some basic background in independent study. And I think the first thing to know is that independent study is really a broad term. It refers to any academic program where students are working independently under the general supervision of a teacher, but not necessarily attending school on a daily basis. Each student has a written learning contract that sets out the activities and assignments the student is expected to complete. And at the local level, in your districts, these programs can take many forms. They can be online learning. They can be programs that mix online learning and classroom learning. We sometimes call that blended learning. They can be programs that incorporate internships or work experience, other types of off-campus activities, even programs that assist parents with homeschooling their students. There's really, across the state, great diversity in what these programs look like. There's also great diversity in the reasons that students enroll in independent study programs. Sometimes they're behind in credits and they need to catch up. Sometimes they may be accelerated and wish to take a course that isn't even offered at their school. There's many reasons a student might enroll in one of these courses. So turning to page 2 of our handout, we give you some background on how extensive these programs really are. Last year in 12-13, there were approximately 165,000 students enrolled in independent study. That's about 3% of all K-12 students in California. That enrollment includes students in both school districts and charter schools. And most students, although not all, are enrolled in the high school level, grades 9 through 12. So before I wrap up the background section, I think there's really 3 special rules for independent study that are important to understand. The first is that there's a requirement that whenever a student completes an assignment, a teacher is required to evaluate that assignment and essentially convert it to an equivalent amount of time in the seat. So for that purpose, a teacher looks at the assignment and says, had the student been in the classroom, how much classroom time would have been taken by that assignment. And the purpose of that conversion is to ensure comparability between the independent study programs and a traditional classroom program. The second special rule, which the administration mentioned earlier, deals with the student-teacher ratios in independent study programs. Essentially, the ratio of students to teachers in one of these independent study programs cannot exceed the average ratio for all other programs operated by a school district. And the purpose of that is really to keep the ratios from becoming unreasonably high in these independent programs. And the final special rule for independent study is specific to charter schools. Charter schools that offer independent study must participate in a special fiscal review every few years. And that review generally requires charter schools to demonstrate they spend their budget in certain ways. And if they cannot demonstrate that, then they take a penalty or can take a reduction in their state funding. So turning to page 3, I think this gets into the reason that we even are looking at this proposal and the reason that this has been a point of discussion for the past few years. There are a couple of concerns that are commonly raised in regards to independent study. And the first one concerns the extent of the record-keeping requirements that are imposed on independent study teachers, specifically the requirement that a teacher look at every individual assignment, track it, log it, in many cases keep a copy of the assignment over a period of a number of years, generates a lot of paperwork, a long paper trail, and additional workload for those teachers. That the contracts that students work under, these independent study learning agreements, those are also often recognized as unwieldy. They have to be renewed once a semester, and in addition, the law that governs them was actually written in a pre-computer era, and so the contracts can't be stored electronically. The third issue, again, one that the administration mentioned, is the student-teacher ratios. The intent of the ratio limit is to keep the ratio in independent study programs from becoming very high, but in some cases, having the same ratio limit for independent study as other programs might not make sense. If you have a high school program where students are working very independently, it may not make sense to have the same ratio of those students as in all other programs the district operates. And then finally, some aspects of the special fiscal review that apply to charter schools raise concerns. A few aspects of that process are very prescriptive. We think they maybe get a little bit too detailed in how charter schools spend their funds and manage their reserves. And in addition, we note that for the past few years, that special fiscal review process has generated many appeals, which has created additional workload at the state level, at the local level, and it's also created some fiscal uncertainty for the schools affected by it. So turning to page 4 of our handout, this is really where we set out what we think is the core components of what the governor is proposing. The centerpiece of the governor's proposal is a plan to create a new optional set of rules that would allow districts and charter schools to provide independent study with fewer requirements, specifically some of the record-keeping requirements. So under this system, a local governing board of a school district or a charter school could certify that an independent study course had a specific, was equivalent to a specific amount of time in the classroom, in the seat. And that would eliminate the need for teachers of these programs to assess and review and log and track individual assignments within the course. Under this system, there'd be a requirement that students would make satisfactory academic progress, which would be determined by the teacher supervising the program. And the governor would also allow the learning contracts to be stored electronically and could last up to 1 year, so no longer needing to renew them every semester. For students in high school, this option would be available for programs taught off-site or on-site, similar to current law. For programs serving students in grades K through 8, the programs would have to take place on the school site. The second piece of the governor's proposal modifies the student-teacher ratio limits in a few ways. I think the administration already gave a good background on that, but basically they'd allow the caps to be collectively bargained differently than what's in current law, and they'd allow the ratios to be computed by grade span. And the final piece of the governor's proposal would exempt charter schools using the new independent study rules from the special fiscal review. So turning to page 5, final page of our handout, this goes through our assessment and recommendations for the proposal. Our first recommendation would be to adopt the governor's basic proposal to create a new set of funding rules for independent study courses. We think that would relieve some of the workload on independent study teachers, and involving local governing boards in approving these courses could actually make these courses more transparent and more accountable for their academic outcomes. Second, we'd suggest you reject the requirement that programs serving grades K through 8 be required to only conduct instruction on a school site. That requirement is not imposed on independent study currently, and we think that by including it here, you would miss an opportunity to encourage innovative instruction at all levels, since we know many of these programs occur in younger grades, not just in high school. We recommend you adopt the new rules for student-teacher ratios. We think this provides districts and charter schools with some additional flexibility, but it also continues to limit the possibility that the ratios would become unreasonably high. And our final recommendation, we would recommend you reject the proposal to exempt charter schools using the new independent study funding rules from the special fiscal review. We don't think it makes sense to have charter schools using the old rules have to go through the process as it is now, whereas charter schools using the new rules don't go through any process. We don't think that's a rational basis for treating the schools differently. What we'd suggest instead is to take a broader look at this process and either streamline some of the more prescriptive elements, and we have a proposal from last year that would do that, or to take an even a broader look and focus the special fiscal review more specifically on schools that have demonstrated financial issues or some other audit findings or some other concerns, rather than this process that works on all independent study charter schools. I think our last point would be we'd concur with the administration that there are some technical issues to work out. What we would suggest for today is focusing on whether the broader policy direction moving towards a more flexible system makes sense. And we can certainly work with you and your staff and the departments to make sure that the language ultimately is well drafted and is consistent with your goals. So with that, we'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to take roll and establish quorum.
Mr. Marsucci?
Here.
Chavez?
Here.
Dababne?
Here.
Nistande?
Here.
Ting?
Here.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Ramos?
Good morning. Monique Ramos on behalf of State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson. The superintendent has been a longtime supporter of trying to make online learning programs easier for schools, but he does believe that this proposal has several policy implications and that it should go through the policy process. There's a major shift in the governor's proposal, shifting it from ADA, average daily attendance, to enrollment. There have been several bills moving through the legislative process that have talked about student attendance, chronic absenteeism issues, truancy issues, and we feel that this is a larger policy conversation about the use of enrollment for funding versus ADA for funding. We have raised some technical concerns with Department of Finance, and we are trying to work through those issues, but we do essentially have concerns that this could be an incentive for all high schools to enroll a student in at least one independent study course in order to get 100% funding for enrollment. But like I said, we are working with Finance on that issue. Currently, school districts are required to have a minimum day of 240 minutes. Charters are not required to have a minimum day at all. While this is an issue with current law, we feel that this proposal exacerbates the problem. What we would suggest is a minimum annual minute standard for charters. This would avoid potential abuses, and we think it's flexible enough for charters in their programs. In addition, we also have concerns with the average daily attendance and the full-time teacher. The course-based options and the school site-based blended learning programs will have to have separately tracked and reported ratios in order for us to perform the ratio calculations. So this proves difficult when one LEA is offering, let's say, AP Japanese, and let's say 3 other school districts enter into an MOU with that school district to have their students participate in District 1's program. the problem is under the current system, the teacher is basically identified with the school district that they're employed by. We don't have a way to track the other schools that are using that teacher as well. So it's difficult for us to address this issue in the current language. Additionally, we do have concerns with the reforms to the SB 740 process. We think that this is a program that needs comprehensive reform, and we should look at it holistically and not in this issue, just in this narrow focus. The SPI does support some of the governor's suggested reforms. We support the weekly communications between teachers and pupils, changing the learning agreements to 1 year, allowing electronic records, and eliminating the signatures on work samples. We feel that these are reforms that are good for not just this proposal, but also for the independent study system we have now. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we open it up for questions, I would like to indicate my recommendation to the committee, which is that I think, as the Department of Education indicated, there are well, first of all, I agree with the overall intent of the governor's proposal to provide more flexibility, more opportunities for students to participate, especially in technology-based and work-based instructional programs at the high school level. But the proposed trailer bill language is making major changes to the way the state is providing funding for non-classroom-based instruction. There is, as the Department of Education indicated, there are some concerns that is discussed in the staff analysis as to some pending bills that address these issues of independent study and blended learning, that this may be a good situation where we should let the policy process work. We should thoroughly vet these proposals through the policy process and not through the budget process. Deferring it to our department of our colleagues with the Education Committee, and so I will be recommending that we reject without prejudice the governor's trailer bill language on independent study and blended learning, and referring this to the policy process.
So moved.
Motion's been made. I will second the motion. Yes, but let me open it up to comments and questions from the committee first, if any.
The timing issue. I understand it's a policy issue. I imagine you're in some discussion with the policy committees. What's the timing for this?
Well, we have two bills, SB 1143 by Senator Liu that is scheduled to be heard in the Senate Education Committee on April 23rd. AB 2151, a bill by Mr. Levine addressing some of the blended learning issues, calling for a pilot program. So that, to some extent, will determine the timeline. We may also have an opportunity to revisit this issue, assuming that the governor still has this proposed trailer bill language and they may revise. But as for now, I think I'm proposing that this may be one of those more complicated issues that has some specific bills addressing this specific subject matter, and that perhaps we should defer this. I guess there's often a tug of war, right? Well, maybe not a tug of war, but some discussion about whether it should go through the policy process versus the budget. I think this would be a good one to defer to the policy process.
Well, then if one's the Senate bill is on April 23rd and Levine is just a pilot on blended learning, that doesn't really address all the issues that the LAO was discussing or the governor's proposal. You want me to add to that?
Sure, if I could add to that. SB 1143 is primarily the administration's trailer bill in a Senate bill format. The one significant distinction between the two bills is that the governor's proposal would be implemented in the 14-15 fiscal year, and Senate Bill 1143 would be implemented in the 15-16 fiscal year, so one fiscal year later.
Okay.
Well, that's my concern, because I think the governor has some really good ideas here. I think the LAO address, as he mentioned, we talked about this, some of this last year, and it seems like we're just kicking the can down the street. So I understand it's a policy, but if the policy's not driving it, maybe we should. Just my thoughts.
Appreciate that. Any other comments from the committee? Seeing none, motion's been made and seconded. The motion is to reject without prejudice the governor's trailer bill language on independent study and blending learning, and referring it to the policy process. Do we have anyone in the audience who would like to address this subject matter, issue number 3? Please come forward.
Eric Premack, Charter Schools Development Center. We have a few hundred clients who engage in this sort of instruction. This has been a profoundly dysfunctional regulatory mess for about the past 10 to 15 years. It is sort of a bureaucratic boil just waiting to be lanced. I call it Flintstones policy for a post-Jetsons era. I think it appropriately belongs in this committee. The issues are nearly entirely fiscal and budget related. In my experience in watching the policy committees struggle with this, I don't think they have the horsepower on these kinds of technical issues, frankly, to deal with it, and that's why they continue to die there every year. We would encourage you to take these up in this setting. I think it's most appropriate. If not, I kind of wonder if maybe you should just merge the two committees together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Moira Top on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association. And like the previous speaker, charter schools are supportive of the item. We're supportive of it because if you remember 20 years ago when charter schools were started, part of the bargain was that, that charter schools become the incubators for innovation. And this is a prime example where charter schools have been on the forefront. They have been innovating in this space. And we see the entire spectrum. It's a long gamut of innovations that have occurred and continue to occur, all the way from one side of the spectrum, which is independent study, 100% independent study. You've got a student who doesn't attend a traditional school and is 100% on independent study, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where you see this more and more, where a school or a student is operating and coming to school in a traditional, in what we would consider a traditional manner, but using technology or work study in an innovative manner. And I think the major theme throughout this spectrum is individualization. And even, for those of us who kind of went to a traditional school, it's hard for us to kind of get out of the mold that things are changing, but the reality is kids are not learning the way they used to. That is just the reality that we're living in, and we have got to change with the times. Our statutes are based on archaic and traditional. They made sense 40 or 50 years ago, but the way kids learn, they've got iPads, they're using 5 different pieces of technology at once, and we have got to address that. And I agree with the previous speaker that there are tremendous fiscal implications with this. In fact, it's almost entirely based on the fiscal challenges, because, of course, the way we fund schools is based on students' time in seats. And so we've got to change that rubric in order for it to make sense and to innovate, and not just at charter schools, but in district schools as well. We agree with the LAO and with some of the department's comments that that there are some improvements that need to be made. We support the department's suggestions about making sure that instructional minutes are better accounted for in the charter school provisions, and we look forward to working with you and your staff through the May revision. We hope the proposal does come back before you, and ask for your support. Thanks.
Good morning, Patty Herrera representing Riverside County Schools. We really appreciate the leadership and the vision of the governor with this proposal. It's something that we strongly support. We really appreciate his attempt to alleviate the administrative burdens under the traditional IS program, as well as to expand opportunities for students to learn, like our previous colleague just noted, in the ways that are unique to them now and with our current technology. In Riverside County, we have a very robust school. It's called the Riverside Virtual School. We brought a lot of staff down to visit the school. What we're finding in that particular school is that our students have vast and disparate needs that this particular school is meeting. For example, the stress on their schedule to accommodate what to them are important extracurricular activities to keep them invested in their education. Independent study, or like something like the governor is proposing in terms of course-based certification, as opposed to the administrative burdensome time value of work into ADA, would allow us to better serve those kids and meet their individual needs. So this is, again, like our colleagues before me, we encourage you to consider this as part of this committee and advance the governor's proposal. We also would like to say that we support the LAO's recommendation to expand the grade 9 to 12 proposal to include K through 12. We understand the reticence around doing that. However, we think it's consistent with independent study. We offer independent study for K through 12 students, and we think it's consistent with that policy. So again, we thank the governor for his leadership and vision and hope that you'll advance this proposal. Thank you.
Good morning, Barrett Snyder on behalf of the San Diego County Office of Education and the San Francisco Unified School District and the California Consortium for Independent Study, representing teachers and administrators of independent study around the state. Very supportive of the governor's proposal around independent study. We think it might be wise for the legislature to consider separating the independent study issues in the proposal from the charter school issues. And if we focus just on the independent study issues, I think sort of everybody wins. These are changes in law that folks have been asking for a long time, really since the advent of the internet, particularly around the pupil-teacher ratios, allowing that to be collectively bargained is very good. The major issue for schools they're facing, if nothing else out of this proposal, the biggest thing you could solve for them is the requirement that these assignments be signed and dated. It is one of the biggest impediments to offering these instructional strategies to students, because it becomes this audit nightmare where they got to store paper in a warehouse literally for 3 years until an auditor shows up. What it does is it disincentivizes school districts from offering innovative programs, and California is lagging the nation now as a result. If you remove nothing else but that, you'll make a lot of progress. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members, Jeff Frost, representing the California Association of Suburban School Districts and the Riverside Unified School District. I would just echo the comments that Ms. Herrera and Mr. Snyder made. We're very supportive of the proposal that the governor has laid out. We think there are many components of that do need to move forward. Whether you do it in the fiscal committee or the policy committee, it's clearly a policy issue. But the question is, do you want to move something forward? And we think that this is something that the Assembly should move forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Lucia with Ed Voice. We strongly support the governor's proposal. We want to specifically highlight that we support going forward in 1415. You heard today that with the testimony in your panelists that every single issue that was raised was a fiscal issue. Also, with respect to the staff analysis, it points out the question of the possibility of having a significant general fund cost if more students take advantage of these opportunities and don't drop out. And we would like to point out that there's a lot of research that shows that you will save anywhere from 3 to 5 and in some cases 10 to 1 on the state general fund if these dropouts aren't in income maintenance programs or the juvenile or adult correctional system later. We also know that without getting rid of these antiquated regs on the minutes requirements, the signatures on documents and so forth, these are the exact issues that are used by detractors of CTE and STEM programs and partnerships with industry where they just say this is not doable. They can't do it, and the stricture and current law is being used to dismantle CTE in several school districts and county offices of education. Right now, as we get underway with LCFF and LCAP, it's critical that all of these issues be dealt with immediately, or these are the death by 1,000 cuts that will allow people to reprogram the money and never bring it back to an opportunity that's so promising, and it shows great success for kids all over the state where districts are willing to work through these issues even now under the current rules. And we encourage you to make it available to every school district, every county office of education, every charter school, and every child in California, so that the California public school system is where these children are going to get their best educational opportunity rather than dropping out or going to a private school.
Hi, my name is Sandra Smith, and I'm from Democrats Against Common Core. And I wanted to commend the chairman for wanting to have a more input from the Education Committee regarding this major shift in policy. And I believe that this is something that could have major implications down the road. One of my biggest concerns with the current laws regarding charter schools is the ability for them to be for-profit. And I would heavily urge that to be addressed and eliminated. The part making it so that they're not subject to as much fiscal review is very, very concerning to me. This is a really big issue, and it's becoming quite controversial, and it's becoming subject to more and more public attention. There are thousands and thousands on Facebook, which are growing every day and becoming more organized to come to the legislative level to try to be heard. And so I commend you for wanting to defer this, to make sure that it's thoroughly vetted, to make sure that the right decision is being made for California. And another concern is that charter school officials, the board is not publicly elected, and this is just, the people who oppose Common Core are concerned that this is just a move towards the privatization of education from the very top down. And so the more that this could be worded to address those concerns, the better. So thank you.